Graphical User Interface, or GUI development. This nugget is probably much anticipated by some of you. We're finally going to move beyond the so-called console-based application in which all input, processing, and output is rendered in non-graphical text. Here we're going to start by understanding what GUI toolkits are and specifically what choice we have in the Python programming language. Because it's bundled with CPython and because it makes a really nice all-around beginner's GUI toolkit, we're then going to look at tkinter toolkit in particular, and I'll show you how to build graphical user interfaces using those classes. Let's get to work. First, there's the preliminary question, why are we interested in building a graphical user interface? Isn't a console or command line based utility enough? Well, yes and no. It's a different programming paradigm, really. We've come to learn Python by starting off with more of a procedural model. Then I brought in object-oriented programming. With graphical user interfaces, you're really turning or shifting your paradigm yet again to a more event-based methodology, in which the application opens and literally sits there doing nothing and waits for the user to do some action on one or more controls in the application. Quite frankly, now that we're in the 21st century, I would hazard a guess that most users, end users, are going to want a graphical user interface. Not all of us are science, math, computer science geeks who are really comfortable in a console environment. So that out of the way, we know that we want to build a GUI application. We can build and deploy cross-platform desktop applications in Python using these GUI frameworks or GUI toolkits. In the Python literature, you'll commonly see references to frameworks or toolkits. They're about the same thing. What a toolkit or framework is really at base is a collection of classes that you can subclass from or instantiate objects from directly. That'll obviously save you a lot of work having to just start from scratch. Now in this nugget we're considering, as I said, desktop windowed applications. A lot of folks just don't even like the desktop application domain. Users are so used to nowadays being connected to the internet, and many software developers think, well, the browser needs to be the interface element, not some desktop application. I wish we had time to go into the pros and cons of each approach. The good news, though, in some, is that there are frameworks available in Python for web application development. In addition, we're going to close this course, actually, with a survey of many Python web frameworks. But yet again, here we're dealing with cross-platform desktop applications. Another vocabulary term that we need to be familiar with that comes up a lot in Python GUI development is the widget. Widget is what's called a portmanteau, a combination of two words, window and gadget. Essentially, any graphical user interface that you've used, whether you're on Mac OS X, Linux, or Windows, is going to be composed of one or more window objects or frames. tkinter in particular has a model with layered windows or framed windows that remind me a little bit of layers in the Adobe applications, where you can lay other elements within that graphical user interface window. Things like buttons, text boxes, labels, icons, etc., and arrange those on your grid or on your geometry to whichever way best suits you and your users. Composing the interface is an art and science unto itself, to be sure. There's courses, there are books, there are computer-based training wholly devoted to good user interface design. Once you have your gadgets arranged on your canvas, as it were, the heavy lifting begins when you write event handlers that will respond to when the user initiates something like clicking a button, checking a checkbox, unchecking a checkbox, putting text in a text field, and so on. I've culled several graphics from doing a Google image search. This is a representative example of a tkinter-based Python graphical user interface. Now, of course it's humongous, of course it's cumbersome, of course it's too busy. This is obviously a proof of concept just to show you some of the variety in controls or widgets, remember, that tkinter and Python GUI toolkits have. You're used to a windowed environment that has your standard windowed control buttons: minimize, maximize, restore, close. You can do scroll bars and resizable forms. We can do menus. That presents a nice compact way to put functionality in your user interface. Lots of buttons. You notice we have these layers or frames, also good for organizing more complex form layouts. Text boxes, single-line text boxes, multi-line text boxes. For mutually exclusive choices, we have the radio button control. For additive choices, we have check buttons. We have the option menu, also called the pop-up or fly-out menu. We have the drop-down list box. This is all pretty standard fare, stuff that we might take for granted in the end-user applications that we develop. But as I say, and I can't stress this enough, when you're using Python to develop an application and you've decided that you want a graphical user interface, it's important to make sure that you're choosing the correct widget for the job for the sake of ease of use and performance. Before we delve into tkinter, which is CPython's native built-in packaged GUI toolkit, I think you should be aware of at least these three popular GUI toolkits: WXPython, PyQt, and PyGTK. All three of these are ports or bindings to Python of a cross-platform GUI toolkit. Traditionally, the cross-platform toolkits are written in C. WXPython is a port of the WXWidgets framework. Some popular applications that have been written that are available for download that rely upon WXWidgets include the original BitTorrent client and the Dropbox client utility. PyQt, Qt, is the name of the general cross-platform toolkit. This is really popular and you can develop some really nice looking user interfaces. Quite frankly, tkinter is nice to get started with and it's fairly functional, but you'll want to look into one or more of these three toolkits if you want to get into some really good looking GUIs and well-performing GUIs. For those of you who are familiar with Linux, you're, I'm sure, familiar with the KDE desktop environment. That's written using the Qt toolkit. Google Earth, one of my favorite applications, is a Qt application. The Opera web browser and my favorite media player, the VLC media player, all were developed with Qt. And again, PyQt is the Python port of the Qt toolkit. Finally, we have PyGTK. The GTK Plus library, C library, is a graphical user interface library that's used. Again, for you Linux people, you generally speaking have a choice of either KDE, and the other big player in a desktop windowing environment is GNOME, also called GNOME. Another, the open source competitor to Photoshop, GIMP, is also an application developed with GTK Plus. Therefore, these toolkits are not insignificant. They're not toys. You can develop honest-to-goodness commercial and or open source tools using these toolkits. Turning our attention again to Google Images, I fetched just some representative examples of applications that folks have built using the aforementioned GUI toolkits. This first one shows you a very Linuxy interface that was developed using WXPython. Just your standard issue text box. These are labels, these are frame controls, there's a checkbox, and there's a close and a save button. Pretty straightforward. PyQt develops much smoother looking applications. This is an Ars image uploader utility associated with arstechnica.com. As you see, it features some really slick user interface elements: menus, thumbnail images, masked passwords, spinner boxes, as they're called in the Windows GUI world. We have a progress meter. This is evidently, well, it says, an image uploading utility. And then for PyGTK, this is, I'm not sure what this application does. I believe this is Arabic here, so I'm unable to read it. But just want to give you a look and feel for what's going on. I believe Arabic reads from right to left, which explains why these controls look like the